One daughter is a doctor, the other is a maid. My father, Logan Holt, said it while raising his glass in front of 14 guests at our Thanksgiving table, and then he laughed. A few people followed his lead, and he said it in front of my daughter. Mia was sitting right beside me, 8 years old. She tugged on my sleeve, her voice small, confused. Mommy, is being a maid a bad thing? That was the last Thanksgiving I ever stayed quiet, because what I said next, right there in front of everyone at that table, changed everything. And my father, he hasn't hosted a holiday dinner since. But here's what no one in that room knew. The man my father was trying so hard to impress that night already knew exactly who I was. My name is Sadie Hole. I'm 31 years old, a single mom, and for the past 6 years, my own family has called me the maid. Let me take you back 6 years earlier. Spring, the week I moved back home with nothing but 2 suitcases and a 2-year-old on my hip. The drive from Richmond to Charlottesville should have taken about 2 hours. It took me almost 3. I had to pull over again and again because Mia wouldn't stop crying. She was 2. She didn't understand why her dad wasn't in the car. Truth is, neither did I. My ex-husband left on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, the checking account was empty. Thursday, he filed paperwork using his mother's address. And by Friday, I was standing on my parents' front porch in Ivy, Virginia, holding a diaper bag and whatever dignity I had left. My father opened the door. His eyes went straight to the suitcases, then to me, then to Mia. The guest house out back is empty, he said flatly. You can stay there, but this is temporary. Don't make it a habit. No hug, no. Are you okay? Just terms. The space he gave me was barely 350 feet. 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, a bathroom where the shower ran cold after 4 minutes like clockwork. It sat on my parents' land. No lease, no contract, just my father's word. At the time, I didn't think that mattered. Within a week, I was out knocking on doors, offering cleaning services. $18 an hour, cash. A neighbor agreed to watch Mia while I worked. I scrubbed bathrooms, mopped floors, organized closets and pantries for women who were living the life I thought I'd have by now. That same month, my older sister, Claire Hull, finished her dermatology residency. My parents threw a dinner party. 20 guests. I showed up late because I had just come from a job across town, still smelling faintly of bleach. My father didn't miss the opportunity. He stood at the head of the table smiling and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Sorry, Sadie's late." She was busy scrubbing someone's bathtub. A few people laughed. Some shifted uncomfortably. Claire looked down at her plate. I sat down and said nothing. That was the first time. It wouldn't be the last, because the truth is the jokes didn't start when I moved back home. They started long before I ever left. Growing up, Claire was always the one with opportunities. SAT tutors, summer prep programs, campus tours at places like Duke and UVA. When she got into medical school, my father took out a second mortgage without hesitation. Every dollar she needed, he found it. No questions asked, no limits. But when it was my turn, he sat me down at the kitchen table and said, "Community college is more than enough for someone like you, someone like me." Even now, I can still hear those words. I went to community college anyway, paid for it myself, waitressing, babysitting, cleaning the church on weekends 2 years. Graduated with honors. No one came. Not one person from my family showed up. Every holiday after that followed the same script. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter brunch. My father would raise his glass and say, "This is my daughter, Dr. Claire Hole." And then, almost like an afterthought, he'd gesture in my direction. "And this is Sadie. Just Sadie. Not the one who graduated with honors. Not the one raising a child on her own. Just Sati." My mother, Amy Holt, never corrected him, not once. When I finally said something about it, she pressed her fingers to her temples and sighed. "Your father just wants the best for both of you. Don't take it so personally." But here's what nobody at that table ever knew. Claire's medical educations cost around $400,000. My father covered about half. The rest federal loans, nearly $200,000 in debt, quietly hanging over her life while everyone praised her success. But in the whole family, image was everything. And my role in that image had already been decided. At least that's what they believed. It didn't happen all at once. Nothing ever does when you're desperate. It starts quietly, not with a plan, but with a pattern. By my second year back in Charlottesville, I had cleaned more than 60 homes. And somewhere in between scrubbing floors and organizing closets, I began to notice something. The Shenandoah Valley was filled with second homes. Large estates owned by people from DC or Richmond. People who showed up maybe a few times a year and left everything else unattended. Those homes didn't just need cleaning. They needed coordination, oversight, someone to manage landscapers, schedule maintenance, handle guest turnovers, meet contractors at 7 in the morning and lock up after events that ended past midnight. And the truth, no one was doing it properly. So, I stopped thinking like a cleaner, and I started thinking like a business owner. I registered an LLC, built a basic website at 2 in the morning while Mia slept in the next room, named it Blue Haven Property Group. The name sounded bigger than it was at the time. It was just me and a secondhand laptop that overheated if I pushed it too hard. That month, I signed my first 3 contracts. They weren't massive, but they were real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to pride. I told my mother. I remember standing in the kitchen, my phone still open to the confirmation emails. Mom, I said, smiling. I just signed 3 clients. I'm actually building something. Amy nodded, barely looking up. That's nice, sweetheart. Claire just got invited to speak at a dermatology conference in Boston. And just like that, the moment disappeared. I stood there still holding my phone, and something inside me settled into place. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just permanently. Nothing I built would ever matter in this house. I could have cured cancer, and my mother would have asked if Claire had done it first. That night, after Mia fell asleep, my phone rang. Unknown number, 540 area code. I almost didn't answer. Hi, the woman said. This is Evelyn Carter. I'm your father's sister, and I think it's time we talked. I froze because in our family, that name wasn't just avoided, it was erased. My father didn't have a sister, at least not in the version of the story he told, but she existed. And apparently she was calling me. Evelyn Carter had divorced her husband years ago. In a place like Charlottesville, where reputations moved faster than facts, and people still spit about things that happened a decade ago. That alone was enough to brand her as a problem. But she didn't leave. She stayed, opened an antique shop downtown on Main Street, lived alone, and from what I'd heard, lived exactly how she wanted. My father cut her off completely, told everyone she was a disgrace. I hadn't spoken to her in 10 years. We met for coffee the following week. Her shop smelled like wood polish and old paper. Warm, quiet, nothing like the tension I had grown up with. I heard about you, Evelyn said, watching me carefully. A client of yours mentioned you said you're the only person she trusts with her lake property. I blinked. Small town news travels fast. I'll get straight to it, she continued. I want to invest in your company. I almost laughed. $25,000, not a loan. Equity. I stared at her. That amount was more than I had made in months combined. I'm not doing this to get back at your father, she added, like she could hear the question forming in my head. Then why? She leaned back slightly. Because I know what it feels like to be erased from your own family, just for choosing a different life. She let that sit, then softer. Does that sound familiar? I didn't answer. I just nodded and I took the money. I hired 2 part-time employees, started scheduling properly, tracking expenses, running operations like something real instead of barely keeping up with demand. Before I left, Evelyn said something that stayed with me long after that conversation ended. Family is supposed to be a safe place, Sadie. Not something that cages you. She paused like she was deciding whether to say more. There's something I know about your father. Something you don't. But not yet. I drove home that night with a check in my bag and a feeling I couldn't quite name. Something between relief and unease. 2 years passed quietly, but not easily. There were months I almost quit. Clients who left. Contracts that didn't renew. Weeks where I worked 14 hours a day and still wasn't sure I'd make rent. That's how long it took for everything to change. Some clients left as quickly as they came. It didn't happen overnight. By the time I turned 27, I had 5 employees, 18 properties under contract, and a reputation that was starting to spread across the valley. Blue Haven was still small, but it was no longer fragile. I reinvested everything. Every dollar went back into the business before it ever touched my life. Bought a proper van, printed real business cards. Mia helped me choose the logo, a white magnolia flower against a deep green background. She said it looked strong and pretty at the same time. I like that. I needed that. But despite all of it, I was still living in that same guest house, still on my father's land, still without anything in writing, no lease, no security. And eventually my father decided to remind me of that. It was a Sunday dinner, no guests, just family. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, Claire and Ryan Caldwell sitting across from me, Mia at the corner of the table, coloring quietly. Halfway through the meal, my father set his fork down. That land out back is worth something now, Logan Holt said casually. I might need to make some changes. I looked up. What kind of changes? Don't worry about it, he replied. Just understand, nothing is permanent. The room went still. Claire stared at her plate. Ryan took a slow sip of water. My mother reached for the salt like it required her full attention. No one said a word. Because in this house, when my father spoke like that, it wasn't a discussion, it was a decision. Later that night, after Mia was asleep, my phone rang. My mother. Her voice was tight, controlled, like she was trying to soften something that couldn't be softened. Someone came to look at the property last week, she said. My chest tightened. A developer. A pause. I don't know, your father handles those things. What developer, Mom? Another pause, then quickly. It's probably nothing. I shouldn't have said anything. She hung up. I sat on the edge of my bed in that small guest house on land I didn't own, in a home I had no rights to. And for the first time, I felt it. Not just uncertainty, not just pressure, but the ground beneath me starting to shift. The next morning, I started looking for a place to rent. Something close to Mia's school. Something I could afford without pulling money out of the business. But Charlottesville isn't an easy place to find housing, especially not something stable. 3-bedroom rentals near Burnley Moran Elementary, hard to find, and the few that were available cost more than I could justify. Within a week, my mother found out. Of course, she did. In a town like this, nothing stays private. The realtor I contacted, a friend of hers. The call came at 8 in the morning. "Sadie, you're looking at apartments." Her voice trembled. "You're planning to take Mia away from us." "I'm not taking her away from anyone. Your father is going to be devastated after everything we've done for you." I almost asked, "What exactly have you done for me?" But I didn't because I already knew the answer wouldn't matter. That evening, my father called. No warning, no build-up, just his voice on the phone. Flat, controlled, final. "If you move out, you're completely on your own. No emotion, no hesitation. Don't expect us to watch Mia on weekends. Don't expect to be invited for holidays." I tightened my grip on the phone. "Are you serious?" "I'm being practical." Of course he was. He always knew exactly where to press. Mia called my parents every single night before bed. She drew pictures of her grandfather's garden. She counted the days until she could see them again. And he knew. Taking that away from her wasn't something I would do lightly, so I stopped searching. Not because I was weak, but because I understood the timing mattered. Leaving too early would cost me everything I had spent 2 years building. In a place like Charlottesville, reputation travels faster than truth, and Logan Holt was respected. If I walked away, he would control the narrative. The ungrateful daughter, the one who took their granddaughter away. And that story, it would reach every potential client within miles before I ever had the chance to explain otherwise. So I stayed, not permanently, just long enough. Long enough that when I did leave, I wouldn't need anything from him. Not his land, not his support, not his version of who I was. That moment hadn't come yet, but I could feel it getting closer. The first cracks didn't show in me. They showed in Mia. Her teacher called me in on a Wednesday afternoon, Mrs. Collins, kind, patient, the kind of woman who had spent decades shaping children with quiet consistency. "Mia's been withdrawn at lunch," she said gently. "The other kids asked what you do for work, and she didn't answer. She just shrugged." I sat there in that small plastic chair, staring at the edge of her desk, and felt something inside me split open. My daughter, 8 years old, already learning to be embarrassed of me. That night, after I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me. "Mommy, do you like your job?" I smiled softly. "I love my job, baby." She hesitated. "Then why does Grandpa say it like it's something bad?" I brushed her hair back, kissed her forehead, and turned off the light. I didn't answer because I didn't know how to explain something I had spent years trying to ignore. I walked into the kitchen, sat down at the table, and stared at nothing for almost an hour. That was the moment it shifted. This wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about pride or dignity or proving anything to my parents. This was about Mia. Because my father's words, his jokes, his tone, his constant little performances, they weren't just landing on me anymore. They were shaping her. She was 8, and she was already learning that her mother wasn't someone to be proud of. That same week, an email came through, a new development project in the valley. 12 luxury vacation homes. Full-service property management. Annual contract value over $500,000. Enough to double my revenue. Enough to expand the team. Enough to finally leave that guest house behind for good. I called Evelyn Carter that night. Told her everything about the opportunity, about Mia, about what was happening. She didn't interrupt, just listened. Then after a long pause, she said quietly, "Fear is like a landlord, Sadie, and the longer you stay, the more it costs you." I didn't sleep much that night, but by morning I knew what I had to do. I picked up the phone, dialed the number listed on the proposal. 2 rings, a voice answered, calm, measured, confident. "This is Victor Langford, Langford Development Group. How can I help you?" I took a breath and I pitched. He didn't say yes right away. He didn't say no either. "Send me your portfolio," he said. So I did. Everything I had, property photos, client testimonials, maintenance reports. I organized it like someone who understood that this wasn't just an opportunity. It was a turning point. 3 days later, my phone rang. "Victor again." I asked around, he said. 3 separate property owners gave me the same answer. "If you want it done right, you call Blue Haven." I closed my eyes for a second. "Let that land, we should meet," he added. We met that Monday at his office in Stunton. I wore the only blazer I owned, still faintly smelled like dry cleaner chemicals. He shook my hand, looked me directly in the eye and said, "You're exactly who we've been looking for. Let's move forward." I signed a 2-year contract for the first 3 properties, phase 1 of his development. Just like that, Blue Haven stopped being an on-woman operation and became something real. I hired 4 new employees that same month, structured the business properly, put systems in place for the first time. I wasn't catching up, I was leading. And then at home, everything shifted again. My father called me into his study. The room smelled like tobacco and leather. The same room where decisions were made and rarely questioned. "I need you to sign something," he said. I stepped closer. "What is it?" "A move-out agreement. You'll be out of the guest house by March." I blinked. That's 4 months away. Plenty of time. I picked up the document. Legal formatting, official letterhead, a bold date printed at the top. I looked up. Why? He leaned back in his chair, calm, unmoved. Because it's my property. No explanation, no discussion, just authority. I looked back down at the papers, and that's when I noticed. The law firm listed at the bottom. Not a family attorney, a commercial real estate firm. My chest tightened. This wasn't just about me leaving. This was bigger. Someone was buying the land. I'm not signing this tonight, I said evenly. I'll review it first. I set the document down, turned, and walked out. My hands didn't shake, but my heart was racing. The next morning, my mother called. Of course, she did. Her approach was always softer. That was what made it harder. She invited me over for tea. Chamomile, the good china, gold-rimmed cups she only brought out when she once wanted something. A performance wrapped in politeness. Your father is under a lot of pressure, she said, her voice carefully measured. Some of his investments haven't gone well. He needs to sell the land. I stared at her. Then why didn't he just tell me? We are telling you, she replied. You're just choosing not to hear it. I set my cup down slowly. You're asking me to move my daughter out of the only stable home she's had without being honest about why. I had to find out on my own. Her expression shifted, subtle but sharp. Claire would never make this difficult. I met her eyes. Claire doesn't live in a guest house on Dad's land. Then she said it exactly. She held my gaze because Claire made something of herself. The words didn't hit loud. They hit deep, not because they were new. I had heard worse, but because they came from her. My mother, the woman who used to braid my hair before school, the one who was supposed to feel like safety. I stood up, left the tea untouched, didn't slam the door. I just closed it quietly, and somehow that felt louder than anything I could have said. That night I sat on the porch of the guest house while Mia slept inside. My phone buzzed in my hand, a name I hadn't seen in months. Claire, can we talk? Just us. I stared at the message longer than I expected. My sister hadn't reached out in over a year. Not on my birthday, not on Mia's, not once. And now suddenly she wanted to talk. Something was wrong. I just didn't know what yet. We met at a coffee shop in Westboro, about 20 minutes away. Far enough from Charlottesville that no one would casually mention seeing us together. Claire looked different. Not worse, just smaller. Her hair was pulled back, no jewelry. The confidence I had grown up envying had softened into something quieter, something closer to exhaustion. She ordered black coffee. I did the same. We sat by the window. A full minute passed. Neither of us spoke. Then she said it. Ryan wants a divorce. I blinked. Since July, she said. We've been pretending for 4 months. Why are you telling me? She looked down at her cup because you're the only one who understands what it's like to start over. That landed harder than I expected. Claire Hull, the one whose name opened every toast, the one my father built his pride around, sitting across from me, asking how to survive. Another pause, then quieter. I know they treat you differently. I saw it. I just never said anything I should have. I didn't tell her it was okay because it wasn't. Instead, I asked, how much debt are you carrying? She flinched slightly. About 180 federal loans. Ryan handled the payments. If we separate, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. I already knew. She asked if I knew a good divorce lawyer. I gave her a name, the same one I had used 5 years earlier. She wrote it down on a napkin, folded it carefully, and slipped it into her purse. And for a second, just a second, she looked like the version of herself I remembered before medical school turned her into a title. I didn't feel sorry for her, but I didn't feel vindicated either, just tired. On the drive home, I kept thinking about it. Both Holt daughters sitting in separate coffee shops years apart, trying to figure out how to rebuild after men walked out on us. And I couldn't stop asking myself, if Claire was falling apart too, why did our parents fight so hard to keep this image alive? Why spend decades building a perfect family when no one inside it was actually okay? Was that love or just fear of what people might say 3 months before Thanksgiving? That's when everything started to accelerate. Blue Haven had grown. 16 employees, 18 luxury properties across the valley. Revenue had crossed $3 million earlier that year. I wasn't improvising anymore. I had systems, schedules, uniform teams, client review cycles. The same woman who once scrubbed bathtubs for $18 an hour now signed contracts over lunch. But inside my parents' house, nothing had changed. To them, I was still Sadie, the one who cleaned, the one who helped out. Then one afternoon, I got a call. Hi, is this Sadie Hull? This is Rachel Bennett from Virginia Business Review. I paused. We're putting together a feature on entrepreneurs under 35. Your name came up multiple times from different sources. Not my sister, not my father's connections. Me. I'll do the interview, I said. But I have one condition. Of course, don't mention my family. This is about the business, Rachel agreed. She spent 2 hours with me at one of the estate properties, took photos of my team, asked about growth, retention, revenue, strategy. She didn't talk to me like someone doing housework. She spoke to me like a CEO because that's what I was. This issue comes out Thanksgiving week, she said as she packed up. We'll send you an advanced copy. Thanksgiving. The timing felt almost too perfect. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Claire. The only person I told was Evelyn. She listened quietly, then laughed. A warm, genuine laugh. Well, she said, that should make dinner interesting. For the first time in 6 years, someone was talking about my work. Not as a joke, but as something worth recognizing. And I held on to that feeling, kept it close like a small flame in the dark, waiting. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I was in the main house kitchen helping my mother go over the guest list. My father walked in, energy high, phone in his hand like he had just won something. Guess who's coming to dinner, Logan Holt said. My mother looked up. Who? Victor Langford. He said it like it meant everything. And it did. Victor Langford, CEO of Langford Development Group, the most influential developer in the Shenandoah Valley. My father had been chasing a deal with him for months. This is it, he said already, smiling. Langford at our table. Good wine, good food, good impressions. By New Year's, we close. I stood there holding a serving spoon and felt the temperature in the room drop. Victor Langford, the man I spoke to every Tuesday morning. The man whose properties I had managed for 2 years. The man who once told me I was the most reliable operator in the region. My father had never asked what my company was called, never visited my office, never once looked me up. And Victor, he had no idea that the woman running Blue Haven went home every night to a small guest house behind the property my father was trying to sell. Two completely separate worlds about to collide at one table. I excused myself, drove straight back to the guest house, called Evelyn. Victor Langford is coming to Thanksgiving, I said. Dad invited him. Silence, then a slow exhale. Well, she said, this is going to be interesting. What do I do? Nothing, she replied calmly. You don't have to do anything. A pause. Then the truth has a way of showing up on its own. And then, almost casually, I have plans for Thanksgiving this year. I didn't ask. I should have. The Monday before Thanksgiving, my father called me into his study again. This time, the document on his desk was different. Thicker, stamped, official. A move-out agreement, deadline, March 1st. Sign this by Thanksgiving, he said, standing behind his desk. After that, I involve a lawyer. He didn't sit. He stood there like a man who had already decided how this would end. I picked up the documents and read them carefully. Move-out terms, a waiver releasing any claim to the property. And then buried halfway down the second page, the sale price, $680,000. My chest tightened. My father wasn't just asking me to leave. He was selling the land I lived on, the land Mia called home. I flipped to the final page, and there it was. The buyer, Langford Development Group. Everything inside me dropped fast, hard. For a second, I thought I might actually be sick. My father was selling the property to my biggest client. The same man he had invited to Thanksgiving. The same man who had no idea that the empty guest house being included in that deal was occupied by me, by my daughter. Every single night, I looked up at Logan Hull. He met my eyes, calm, unshaken, like a man who had already decided the outcome. You told Victor the guest house was empty. I didn't phrase it as a question. It will be, he said. Because you're leaving? You mean because you're forcing me out? Because I'm making a business decision. Of course he was. I placed the papers back on his desk, didn't sign, didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. I just turned and walked toward the door. Sadie, his tone sharpened. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. My hand paused on the handle, then I opened the door. I'm not the one making this difficult, Dad. I walked back to the guest house, closed the door behind me, sat down on the floor, and started making calls. My accountant, my lawyer, then Evelyn. Thanksgiving was 5 days away. And for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't dreading it. I was ready. That morning, the house smelled like cinnamon, rosemary, and something heavier. Something I couldn't quite name. Maybe anticipation, maybe dread. I woke up early, dressed Mia in her green corduroy dress, the one with the tiny stitched leaves along the hem. She spun in front of the mirror, smiling. Do I look pretty, Mommy? I smiled back. You look perfect. She hesitated. Will Grandpa be nice today? I knelt down in front of her, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I don't know, baby, but I'll be right next to you the whole time. By 9, I was already in my parents' kitchen, apron on, hair tied back, hands deep in a turkey, just like every year. My mother had assigned me to cook because, as always, Claire needs time to get ready. As if preparing a full Thanksgiving meal for 14 people wasn't something worth getting ready for. Claire arrived just before noon. Perfect hair, pearl earrings, cream cashmere. She looked exactly the way my mother wanted her to look. Ryan Caldwell followed a few steps behind her. Quiet, carrying a bottle of wine like it weighed more than it should, like he already knew something was ending. Guests began to arrive one by one, neighbors, relatives, church acquaintances. By 12:30, the driveway filled, and then a black SUV pulled in. I felt it before I even saw it. Victor Langford and his wife, Sophia. My father moved fast, faster than I'd seen him move in years. Out the door, handshake, smile, clap on the shoulder. Victor, welcome, welcome. We're honored to have you here. Victor stepped inside, calm, polished. He scanned the room, taking everything in. And then his eyes landed on me, standing in the kitchen doorway, apron on, hair pulled back, a thin sheen of sweat at my temples after hours of cooking. Before he could say anything, my mother stepped in. "Oh, that's Sadie, our younger daughter," she said lightly. "She helps with cleaning. Helps with cleaning." Victor nodded, polite, but something flickered across his face. Recognition? Maybe, but it passed for now. His eyes lingered a second longer than they should have. That name. It couldn't be a coincidence. He moved into the living room. My father led him outside shortly after to walk the property. My property. Dinner was served at 2. 14 people seated around a table set with my mother's best china. White plates, blue trim, candles lit, napkins folded perfectly, everything arranged to look like a family that had it all together. My father stood at the head of the table, tapped his glass with a fork. "I'd like to give thanks," he began, his voice warm, practiced like a man delivering a speech he'd given many times before. "For this family, for this home, and most of all, for my daughter, Dr. Claire Hull, who continues to make us incredibly proud." Applause followed, easy, automatic. Claire smiled, tight, controlled. Across from her, Ryan stared down at his plate, jaw tense. No one noticed. My father wasn't finished, and of course he turned toward me, paused just long enough, then smiled. "Sadie." Another beat. "One daughter is a doctor." He let the silence stretch. "The other is a maid." He laughed. That same low, familiar laugh, the one I had heard my entire life. A few people joined in. Uncertain, automatic. The kind of laughter people use when they don't know what else to do. Most of the table went still. Pastor Michael Reed lowered his eyes. His wife pressed her lips together. Sophia shifted slightly in her chair. Victor didn't laugh. He looked at my father, then at me like he was trying to understand what didn't add up. Under the table, Mia's hand found mine, cold, small. I wrapped my fingers around hers. I stayed still. Not yet, but I felt it. Victor's attention lingered on me longer than it should have, like he was close to figuring something out. He hadn't figured it out yet, but he was close. After dinner, once the plates were cleared and dessert had been passed around, my mother stood, glass in hand, poised like she was about to accept an award. "I'd like to say a few words," she said, her voice soft, polished, to Claire, the heart of this family. "We are so incredibly blessed." She didn't say my name, she didn't look at me. She didn't mention Mia. Around the table, people murmured approval. Glasses clinked. Smiles turned toward Claire, who by now looked like she wanted to disappear into the walls. And then, in the quiet that followed, a small voice broke through. "Mommy." Mia right beside me, her eyes wide, shiny with confusion. "Why does Grandpa say you're just a maid?" Everything stopped. Forks hovered midair. Breaths held. Time paused. "Is being a maid bad?" 8 years old. Asking in front of 14 adults whether her mother's work made her less than. My mother reacted first. "Mia, sweetheart," she said quickly. "Grandpa's only joking." Mia looked at her, but no one laughed. No one moved. Silence settled over the table, heavy, unavoidable. I looked at my daughter, this small, honest, fearless person who had just said out loud what no one else in that room had the courage to say. I looked at Victor Langford. He was watching, not confused, not amused. Something else, something sharper. Then I looked at my father, still standing at the head of the table, glass in hand, smile fading, and inside me something that had been stretched thin for years, bent, pressed, diminished, finally gave way, not shattered, not destroyed, released. I set my napkin down, slowly, pushed my chair back, the legs scraped against the hardwood, every head turned. I stood up, looked at Mia first, and then I spoke. "Mia, being a maid is not a bad thing. Any honest work is good work." My voice was steady, calm, measured. Not the voice I used to have in this house, the voice I use now. But since Grandpa brought it up, I let the words hang for just a moment. "Let me tell you what your mom actually does." My father's smile disappeared. "Sadie, sit down. This isn't the time." "You made it the time, Dad. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You stood in front of 14 people and defined me. Now I get to define myself." The air shifted tight. Still, my mother's hand moved to her throat. Claire's eyes widened. I kept going. "I started out cleaning houses," I said, still looking at Mia, but speaking to everyone. "That part is true, and I'm not ashamed of it." A pause then. I just didn't stop there. Another beat. Long enough for it to settle. "I built a company. It's called Blue Haven Property Group." No one moved. "I manage 18 luxury properties across the Shenandoah Valley. I have 16 full-time employees." Still nothing. And last year, I held their attention. "My company generated over $3 million in revenue." Silence, absolute, complete. 14 people sitting there rewriting everything they thought they knew about me. I looked at my father. I will never forget his face. The color drained from it slowly, like something had been pulled out from underneath him. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Amy, Sadie, why are you doing this?" my mother said sharply. "Why are you making a scene?" "I'm not making a scene," I replied. "I'm finishing Dad's toast." From the far end of the table, glass touched down deliberately, quiet but loud enough. I turned. Victor Langford was staring at me, not surprised, not confused, certain, like something had just clicked into place. Victor frowned slightly, like he was replaying something in his head, matching a voice to a face, a name to a memory. "Wait," he said. He stood. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just intentionally. Sadie, halt. He paused. Then you run Blue Haven Property Group. Every head turned back and forth between us. Yes, Mr. Langford. He shifted his attention to my father, and something in his expression hardened. Logan, you didn't mention that your daughter runs Blue Haven. My father tried to respond, but nothing came out. Victor continued. She's been managing my Chanel portfolio for the past 2 years. 3 properties, full-service contracts. His voice was calm, controlled, careful. She's one of the best operators in this region. My father gripped the back of his chair. I didn't know. Victor didn't blink. You didn't know. He repeated it flatly. Not a question, a conclusion. Last week you told me your younger daughter was between jobs. The room reacted, a quiet ripple. Between jobs. Someone echoed under their breath. My mother rushed in. We always knew Sadie worked hard. Victor didn't even look at her. His focus stayed on my father. And my father was staring down at the tablecloth like it might swallow him whole. You invited me into your home, Victor said quietly. You introduced your daughter as a maid while she's the person I trust with assets worth more than most properties in this area. No one spoke, no one moved, and strangely, I didn't feel victorious. I felt something else, like watching a wall collapse, and realizing I had been standing behind it my entire life. Mia tugged gently at my hand. I looked down. Mommy. Her voice was soft. Is that the man you talked to on Tuesdays? I almost smiled. Yes, baby, it is. And then the doorbell rang. The timing was so exact, it almost felt scripted, but it wasn't. Evelyn Carter had always known how to make an entrance. Maybe that was the one thing she and my father had in common. My mother walked to the door, opened it, and froze. Her face drained of color. Evelyn stood on the porch in a navy coat, a bottle of wine in one hand and a magazine in the other. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and she smiled. Not politely, not casually, but like someone who had been waiting years for this exact moment. What are you doing here? My father's voice cracked. You weren't invited. I know, Evelyn said simply. Then she stepped inside. Her eyes moved across the room. The stillness, the half-finished plates, the silverware scattered mid-meal. 14 people sitting there like they had collectively forgotten how to breathe. But I brought something for my niece. She didn't wait for permission. She walked past my mother, past my father, straight to the table, and placed the magazine down on the white tablecloth, right between the cranberry sauce and the gravy. Then she opened it, turned it toward them. A full-page feature, a photograph of me standing in front of one of the estates, arms crossed, the Blue Haven Property Group logo visible on the van behind me, and the headline, Blue Haven Property Group, How a Single Mom Built a $3.1 million business from the ground up. The magazine began to move from hand to hand around the table, one person at a time, eyes scanning, expressions shifting. Pastor Michael Reed, his wife, Sophia Langford, who read it twice. One of the neighbors held it up slightly like she was inspecting something valuable. And at the head of the table, my father stood there watching everything he had carefully built fall apart piece by piece. Evelyn looked at him, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but something closer to disappointment. You were so focused on being ashamed of your daughter, she said quietly. You never stopped to see what she became. My father didn't respond. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. Victor picked up the magazine, read the opening paragraph, set it back down, then looked at my father, and in that moment his expression changed. Not emotional, not angry, but calculating. Logan, he said evenly. The property selling semis, that's the same property your daughter lives on. My father's jaw tightened. That's separate. Victor didn't move. Is she being forced out because of this deal? Silence again, but this time it wasn't passive. It was sharp. I spoke, not loudly, not emotionally, just clearly. I saw the contract last week. He asked me to sign a move-out agreement before Thanksgiving. A few heads turned. The sale price is $680,000. More silence. And he told you the guest house was empty. Victor leaned back slightly, ran a hand across his forehead. Logan, I don't do business like this. Victor, this is a family issue. It became my issue the moment you misrepresented the property. His voice stayed controlled, but there was no softness left in it. You told me the guest house was vacant. That's what I based my offer on. Around the table, reactions broke apart into quiet pockets. Whispers, side glances, unspoken judgments. One couple leaned toward each other, murmuring. Another just stared like they were watching something collapse in slow motion. And then, from the far end of the table, Ryan Caldwell spoke. I'm sorry, he said, voice rough like he hadn't used it in days, but this isn't right. None of this is right. Claire looked at him, and for a moment, something passed between them. Not love, not forgiveness, but recognition. Maybe even the memory of what they used to be. She reached under the table, took his hand. The room didn't explode. There was no shouting, no chaos, just something quieter, heavier truth, standing in the middle of the table, refusing to be ignored. Victor stood, buttoned his jacket. A small movement, but final. Logan, he said, calm and precise. I'm going to pause our discussions regarding the property. Professional, controlled, decisive. I need time to reconsider. Everyone understood what that meant. Pause was over. My father tried. Victor, we can discuss this privately. Victor adjusted his cuffs. We've been discussing it privately. A beat. That's the problem. He turned to me, gave a small nod. Not warm, not distant, respectful, one professional to another. Sadie, I'll call you Monday. We have work ahead of us. Yes, sir. Thank you. He placed a hand lightly on Sophia's back. She stood, collected her purse, and together they walked out without looking back. Within minutes, others followed. Excuses came quickly, too quickly. Early morning, long drive, headache. One by one, the table emptied until 14 became 6, and then just silence. My father remained seated at the head of the table, his glass still full, his plate untouched. The man who had started the evening with a speech now sat in a quiet so deep you could almost hear the candles burning down. $680,000 gone. His reputation in a town where reputation meant everything cracked beyond repair. And not because I attacked him. Not because I tried to embarrass him. But because I told the truth, and the truth didn't stay buried. It never does. When it's been ignored for too long, it steps forward and makes itself known. The house fell into silence. Plates untouched, candles burning low. 6 people sitting in a room that somehow felt emptier than if no one had been there at all. I lifted Mia from her chair. She wrapped her arms around my neck, resting her head on my shoulder, just like she used to when she was 2, back when I first carried her into this house with nothing. I walked toward my parents. Not close, just close enough. I'll be out of the guest house by the end of the month. My father looked up. Not because you asked, I added quietly. Because I should have left a long time ago. Sadie. His voice was different, smaller than I had ever heard it. I'm not angry, Dad, I said. I'm just done waiting for you to see me. My mother's face collapsed. The tears came. Real ones, not the kind she used to manage situations. But for the first time in my life, I didn't move to comfort her. I didn't fix it. I didn't soften it. I looked at Claire. She sat still, hands flat on the table, mascara slightly smudged, Ryan's arm still resting near hers. She met my eyes and nodded. Just once, no words, none needed. I turned, walked to the front door. Evelyn was already outside. She hadn't stayed for the ending. She had been waiting, hands tucked into her coat pockets, watching the sky turn dark. My place has room, she said simply. Enough for both of you. Mia lifted her head, studied her face. Are you the one who sends me birthday cards? Evelyn smiled. Every single year, sweetheart. I buckled Mia into the car, closed the door, sat behind the wheel. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller. The porch light flickered on. No one came outside. No one waved. I took a breath, a full one, the kind that fills your lungs all the way to the edges. And for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't driving away from something. I was driving towards something. In a town like Charlottesville, news doesn't need the internet. It moves through churches, through conversations, through quiet exchanges after Sunday service. By the end of the weekend, 3 days after Thanksgiving, the story had spread. 14 guests meant 14 households, and each household told more. By the end of the week, everyone who had ever shaken my father's hand knew what had happened at that table. And the fallout, it was precise, measured, immediate. Pastor Michael Reed called my father directly. I think it would be best if you step back from the fundraiser committee this year, he said. Focus on your family. Translation, don't show up. My mother's auxiliary group, the one that organized the annual Christmas drive, gave her a polite message. We're moving in a different direction with leadership this year, and word got around. We need women who support other women, Amy. The article came out that Wednesday. Virginia Business Review, my photo printed just inside the cover. Within days, new clients started calling. People I had never contacted. I read the article, each one said like a key, like a signal. At school pickup, Mrs. Collins stopped me. I saw it, she said, holding up the magazine. I always knew there was more to you than this town ever gave you credit for. At the grocery store, at the gas station, at the post office, people looked at me differently. Not with pity, not with quiet judgment, but with something new. Respect. And my father, the man who had built his identity on being respected, stopped showing up. No church, no rotary, no calls returned. The silence from that house was louder than anything he had ever said. Claire called 2 days after Thanksgiving. Not to apologize, not to explain. Ryan and I are separating, she said. I told Mom and Dad last night. How did they react? A pause. Mom said, this can't be happening. First, Sadie, now you. Her voice caught on the word first, like she had finally heard what it really meant. Not concern, accounting, not grief, loss of image. And Dad, nothing, she said. He just sat there. I think he's out of speeches. I could picture it. My father at his desk, a man who had spent his life performing for an audience, now sitting alone with no one left to impress. Claire started calling more after that. Not long conversations, short ones, careful, honest. How did you do this, she asked me one night, at 24. Badly, I said, but I did it. She laughed. A real laugh. The kind I hadn't heard since we were kids. I always thought you were the brave one, she said quietly. I was just the one with the degree. I didn't correct her because she was right. Not about bravery, about the degree. That's all it had ever been. A title on a wall in a house where image mattered more than truth. We didn't suddenly become close. There were too many years between us for that. But something shifted, like two trees that had grown apart, realizing their roots were still connected underground. It wasn't a perfect ending. It wasn't even clean. It was just a Tuesday night phone call, and somehow that was enough. 2 weeks later, my phone lit up while I was standing in Evelyn's kitchen. Dad, I dried my hands, answered. Sadie. His voice had changed, not softer but quieter, like someone had finally turned down the volume. Hi, Dad. You've made your point, he said. Can we move past this? I leaned against the counter. Move past what? Thanksgiving. That wasn't a moment, Dad. I said that was 14 people watching you humiliate your daughter while she cooked for you in front of her child. Silence long enough that I could hear him breathing. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to get caught, I said. There's a difference. More silence. Somewhere in the background, I could hear a clock ticking. The deal fell through, he said finally. Victor pulled out. I know I'm in trouble, Sati. Financially, I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to help. The part of me that was still his daughter. The part that remembered him running behind my bike in that driveway. One hand steady on the seat until I could balance. But I wasn't going to save a man who had spent 6 years pulling me under. When you're ready to talk, really talk, I'll be here, I said. My voice stayed even. Not cold, not soft, just clear. But I won't sit at another table where my daughter learns to be ashamed of her mother. He didn't answer. The line went silent. Then it cut. I stood in Evelyn's kitchen for a long moment, phone still in my hand, staring at nothing. Mia ran past me in the hallway, laughing as she chased the cat. That sound was enough. It had to be. By mid-December, the townhouse started to feel like home. 2 bedrooms on Maple Street, 8 minutes from Mia's school, 10 from the Blue Haven office. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. The first morning, Mia walked into the kitchen in her pajamas, holding a stack of photos she'd taken from the family album, the cottage, the garden, the old porch. She picked one and taped it to the fridge, an Easter from 2 years ago. Her on my father's lap, both of them laughing. I stood there for a moment. She had kept everyone, her grandparents, Claire, even Ryan. She hadn't erased anyone. And I didn't take it down because boundaries aren't about pretending people don't exist. They're about choosing how close they get to stand. That same week, Victor called. Not about the property, about the business. I'm expanding the portfolio, he said. 2 new developments in Rockingham County. I want Blue Haven to take both. I've already referred you to a couple of partners. By January, projections for the year reached 3.8 million. I hired 3 more people, moved out of the home office into a real space, a renovated storefront on Main Street, Blue Haven's name across the glass. Evelyn came by every Sunday, always with dessert, always with time. She'd sit on the floor with Mia, building Lego castles that didn't make much sense, but somehow stayed standing. One afternoon, Mia looked up and said, Mommy, I told my friend you run a whole company. I smiled. What did she say? I said, I know. She's my mom. I turned toward the window so she wouldn't see my face, but Evelyn noticed. She just nodded, quiet, understanding, like she'd been waiting a long time for something good to finally land. Claire's divorce was finalized in February. She moved into a 1-bedroom apartment. First time in her life living alone. No parents, no husband, no backup plan, just her, a futon, and a stack of takeout menus. She called me that first night. I'm terrified, she said. How did you do this at 24? Badly, I said, really badly. I burned rice for 6 months. She laughed, and I laughed with her. The kind of laugh that only happens when both people stop pretending. Mom called, she said after a pause. She's upset we didn't come home for Christmas. That's her choice. I said we don't owe anyone a performance. Silence. Then when did you get this wise? It's not wisdom. I said it's scar tissue. She was quiet for a second, then softer. You know what I used to be jealous of? Not your business, not the money. Then what? The way you didn't care what they thought. I built everything around Dad. Grades, degree, marriage. Every decision was for him and you were just living. I cared, I said. I just ran out of room to show it. We talked for another hour about nothing, about everything. Mia's school, her patience, a lemon chicken recipe neither of us could get right. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And it was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. The letter came in March. Not a text, not an email, an envelope, handwritten, the stamp slightly crooked, like someone out of practice. I recognized the writing immediately, sharp, slanted, all caps, the same way he used to write birthday cards back when he still sent them. I sat on the front steps, the street quiet, Mia at school. Inside a single card, plain cream-colored, no printed message, just 6 words in blue ink. Sadie, I read the article. Dad, that was it. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of what happened of Thanksgiving, of the years. Just I read the article. I held the card for a long time, turned it over, nothing on the back, and part of me still wanted to call him. The part that still remembered his hand on my shoulder the day I learned to ride a bike. How he held on until I said I was ready, and how he let go the second I asked, but I didn't call. I placed the card on the kitchen table beside a vase of magnolia Evelyn had brought the day before. I didn't throw it away, didn't frame it. I just left it there like a door slightly open, not fully unlocked. Maybe it would take years. Maybe it would never happen. A real conversation, a real apology. The kind that doesn't begin with, "Can we move on?" but with, "I understand what I did." But my peace doesn't depend on his timing anymore. Those 6 words weren't enough, but they were his first. And I don't need a second to move forward. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, if I became successful enough, my parents would change. Like there was some number, a revenue milestone, a magazine feature, a title impressive enough that would finally earn their approval. But here's what I've learned. You can spend years trying to become enough for people who already decided you never would be. And that chase will quietly cost you everything. Your time, your confidence, your sense of self. At some point, you have to stop negotiating for respect and start living without it. Not with anger, with clarity. Because closure doesn't always come from an apology. Sometimes it comes from accepting that the apology may never arrive and choosing peace anyway. You don't need permission to move forward. You don't need recognition to be worthy. And you don't need anyone to rewrite your story for it to be true. Build a life that speaks for you. And when you finally sit at your own table, make sure no one there has to shrink to belong. And if this message touches your heart, if even a small part of this story feels familiar, take a moment to reflect on it. Please hit like and share this with someone who needs to hear it. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what would you have done in my place? I read every single one. Please subscribe if you want more stories like this, real, direct, and honest. And if you're still here, thank you. See you in the next.